If you're looking for the next best thing to invest in, try investing in your long-term health with Forward. Forward is intelligent medicine with a personal touch. Their doctors are dedicated to catching top killers like cancer and heart disease early, which could save you tens of thousands of dollars in the long run. So invest in a doctor that's invested in you. Visit GoForward.com to learn more about how Forward can help you manage your long-term health risks for one flat monthly fee. That's GoForward.com.
Hi, everybody. I had a return of Michael Joseph on the podcast this week. We had a good chat, like coronavirus-y stuff, lockdown stuff. I think I might have sounded grumpy through the podcast. I didn't mean to sound grumpy. I'm just a bit fed up of all this shit. It wasn't my, it certainly wasn't my guest's fault for me being grumpy. What was I going to say? There was a little issue with the recording of this podcast. For some reason, Michael's Skype channel was really quiet. I'm still not sure why it was so quiet, because everything was jacked up on the mixing desk. Anyway, I will be mixing everything to the volume of his track, so you might have to knock it up a notch on your listening device. Anyway, if you enjoy the podcast or you enjoy what I do, please head over to Patreon, search for Must See Audio, or if you follow me on any of these socials, you can either ask me for a link or look in my bio and the link will be somewhere. But anyway, if you decide to help us out, it does help the podcast out a lot, even if you just go and do the $2 tier or something. If you don't want to do that, or you can't do that, you can still help. Just share the podcast when you listen to it. Do it now before you listen to it. Just share it on your social media channels. If you're enjoying it, then the chances are your friends will enjoy it. So, share it with them. Don't stop being such a podcast hoarder. I know your sort. You don't want other people to have things because you want to be cool and you want to keep me as like this indie podcast that nobody else knows about. So you can say, oh yeah, well, I listen to this podcast, which has got like 2 viewers or 2 listeners, and one of those listeners is a hamster. I don't want that. I want to be fucking like the British Joe fucking Rogan, and that does not happen unless you tell people about me. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Bye-bye.
You are listening to Must See Audio.
Welcome back to the podcast, Michael Joseph. Cheers for coming on, mate.
Hello, Lee, and thank you for having me.
No, it's all right. You were supposed to come on a few weeks ago, but I think I might have had coronavirus, so I don't know. And then we're in lockdown now. So what have you been up to in the time that you've been away from sitting across the table from me?
So I love that in the world of 2021, you can just totally stand someone up and say, oh, I had the coronavirus, and instantly it is socially acceptable, if not mandatory, to leave it above question. And it is wonderful now that here we are in the 21st century, and finally people will stop coming to work sick, I hope. But since we last spoke, Lee, I've just been plodding along. Actually, as we record this on the evening on Friday the 19th of March, we've just, I think today, formally registered a new little not-for-profit endeavour that I'm starting. So you can be ahead of the game, depending on when this is released publicly. Is that registered today the Manx Taxpayers Alliance, which will be a little endeavour that will keep me entertained and keep me busy and keep me in trouble, I've got to say, which is all about fighting for low fare, simple taxes, about open government transparency, and about good value for money for taxpayers on the Isle of Man. And so that's been one thing. Second of all, I've started doing some work with the cooperative group, big supermarket, food chain, and funeral care, insurance, and so on group right across the UK and the Isle of Man as a bit of a what they call a member pioneer. And so for that means I'll be a bit of a linchpin and connector, communicator for local charities. And finally, yesterday I completed the training, so I'm now a representative of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And so I think those three endeavours have been keeping me busy, both over the last couple of months, but also going forward.
As well as you've been involved with helping out with vaccines as well, haven't you, over here?
Yeah, so I've been doing that weekly. So in fact, this morning was down at the local Isle of Man vaccination hub, and it's been an interesting ride. So I was quite one of the first volunteers to help out a few months ago now, and it was sort of funny because on those early days you'd have the really quite frail and elderly people, literally the most vulnerable people in our community, and they would come in their wheelchairs and you'd help them and so on. And it was wonderful because in that first couple of weeks, the elderly were so grateful for the vaccine. And so they showered the volunteers and the nurses and the vaccinators with baked goods, all sorts of cakes, and, donuts, and all sorts of baked goodies. And I've got to say that the Manx 70-year-olds in the 70s, not quite so generous, but I can confirm today that I think we've had some of the 65 to 70 category, but also some younger people with who are clinically vulnerable, and they've been equally generous again. So thank you, young people of the Isle of Man, because those of you with your clinically vulnerable situations have been very generous with baked goods. And so, as a reminder, if you haven't yet been vaccinated, make sure you get in the baking, get in the kitchen a couple of days beforehand. Bake some goodies for your local volunteer vaccinators because it's wonderfully appreciated, and it's been good fun.
How do you feel about the way it's been distributed on the island? Because you were quite vocal, weren't you, at the beginning, about maybe a lack of urgency in the vaccination program, and that seems to have picked itself right up now.
Yeah, to a certain extent it has. And so I think the important thing to remember about this whole thing is it's not vaccines that save lives, but rather vaccinations. And vaccines do not save lives if they're sitting in the fridge. They're no good if you just look at them. What you've got to do is you've actually got to put them into people's bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of like a seatbelt, in that having a seatbelt in a car by itself doesn't do anything. What you've got to do is you've got to put the seatbelt on. You've got to clip it in, and the same metaphor applies to vaccines. That vaccines only help if you actually use them. And so it was really quite frustrating to see here in the Isle of Man that the administrative leadership were focused bizarrely, and they still are, unfortunately, a little bit more for my liking than I would have liked, on this idea of ensuring that there is vaccines in supply, vaccines in stock, or vaccines on hand. And I disagree fundamentally with that strategic mindset. And that my strategic mindset would be, get these things into people's bodies as soon as we can so we can relieve the hardship of lockdowns, so we can relieve the hardship of COVID killing people, so that we can relieve the hardship of all these things that we've had to endure over the last 12 months to try and deal with COVID. And so in that sense, even actually the day before yesterday, the health minister here on the Isle of Man was talking about how he was going to slow down the distribution of vaccines so that we did not run out. And that is fundamentally, it's a stupid way of thinking about vaccines. And it's the same error that Mark Dreyfus, who's the first minister of Wales, made to international mockery a month or two ago when he said very similar things. And that is that vaccines are not like some sort of emergency ration that you carry when you're in the desert. It's not like insulin where if you don't have any of it, you die. But rather it's like a protective shield. And the only way that you can use this protective shield is if you actually put it into people's bodies, because that's the only way to make it work. And if you happen to use up all your vaccines and have to stop, then that's great, because that means you have used and given your people the maximum amount of protection against the bloody COVID virus. It
is odd. It sounds like keeping food from starving people. in case you run out of crisps.
Yeah, exactly right. And so there's no point leaving this in storage. The only way you can save a life with a COVID vaccine is by using it. So get this stuff into people. Let's use all that we have, because that means we get the maximum protection from what we have.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of holes in our leadership on the Isle of Man lately. I remember a friend of mine when the saber rattling and the what I thought was pretty empty and baseless praise for our government. He said, "Oh, they'll be found out eventually. You know, eventually something will happen which they won't be ready for, and they'll be found out." And I can't watch the briefings anymore. I can't watch them because I can't stand the sight of our chief minister and health official.
Yeah, look, I can understand that, and I think there are a lot of people who react to these things, and especially these briefings, in the way that they would react to a reality TV show. In that there are some people who seem to have a bizarre affection or distaste for various personalities. In the same way that they might cheer for Liverpool Football Club or Manchester United Football Club or Hawthorn Football Club or Green Bay Packers Football Club. And so one of the things that I think is really unusual in my experience of all these briefings is that I have very rarely actually watched any of them live on video stream. And instead what I've been doing is I've been listening to them on a podcast after the fact. First and foremost, so I can play it at a faster speed, so it doesn't cost me half an hour of my life every week. But as a result of this, I have, I guess, a little bit more interest in the actual words. And so it's bizarre that 4 days ago, on the health minister said that the maximum number of vaccination doses that we could give on the Isle of Man is 1,000 a day, subject to deliveries. That was what he said earlier this week. And then yesterday, we delivered 2,000 vaccine doses a day. So in this case, it happens to be a case that, happy that he's wrong. It's better that we delivered more than 1,000. But it's just so weird that on one level, that's a sort of a trivial issue. But on a whole series of these things, there are words that are said that have no reaction to reality. A couple of weeks ago, the Chief Minister falsely said that New Zealand were going to start their vaccination program in the middle of this year. The truth is they started it about 6 hours later, and there was video of it online, by the time we woke up here in the Isle of Man the next day. And so there's a whole bunch of things that are weird because, I don't really care about, the Chief Minister or the Health Minister or the journalists or any of the individuals with personalities. I care about policy. And so if we have an interest in policy, I think that that would be a lot healthier for us as a community.
I think there's a thing of faith as well. Like I don't have any faith in what either of those people say, and I find them quite disingenuous. You can't expect people to follow us like pretty harsh guidelines and rules when you're not sure if those people that are giving the orders are like in any way, shape or form mentally capable of putting these things together to give to you. It's if you think you can make better judgments than your leaders are doing, then I struggle to see how people will like follow everything to the letter like they're supposed to do.
Yeah, look, I understand what you're saying there, and I think that's a natural consequence of open democratic societies, is that we have the pleasure and the opportunity and the ability to criticise our elected leaders. And so I think that once upon a time, when I was a child, I looked up to these politicians and these people in Parliament and so on as being experts, as being special people. But it really was broken for me back when I was, I want to say 23 or 24, when I knew someone from before they were a member of Parliament and then after they were a member of Parliament. And I realised they're just as big as douchebags and clowns and normal people as the rest of us. And in a way, that's, I think, a beauty of democracy, is that it is, just the, ordinary people, and that these politicians are not, many of them are not particularly smart. Many of them are not particularly, charismatic or special or so on. They're just normal human beings. And, in a way, that's sort of a bit of a redeeming feature of them, as opposed to the, idyllic God worship that you might get in less democratic communities and cultures.
How do you feel the lockdowns affected people this time around? Because it seems strange the way it's affecting people. More so.
I agree deeply.
the first one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that for many of your listeners, Lee, who might be located all over the world, they might be thinking to themselves, hey, look, we've been enduring this for a year now. What's wrong with these people in the Isle of Man? They had 6 and a bit months of no restrictions, and then they had 3 weeks of lockdown, and they were 3 weeks off, and 3 weeks. And now it's 2 and a bit weeks back on. What is the cause of that? And I think that one of the problems here in the Isle of Man for the community is the rapidly swinging expectations. And then I think that one of the things that I've learned about happiness in life is it seems to be connected to the idea of expectations. And that if you expect misery, then you will probably get along, you will endure it in a different way to if you expect happiness and end up with misery. And so I think that is that the human condition seems to adjust themselves, or we seem to adjust ourselves to the situation we're in. And so imagine, a middle class, middle of the road person from, suburban England being transported to, the depths of despair of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, some place where disease is endemic, where civil war is a risk, where there's a whole lot of problems. And I feel like that person who's transported to that sub-Saharan African situation would be affected much more emotionally harshly than someone who grew up expecting that world. And so I think that for those people in the Isle of Man, one of the issues that seems to have been a big problem here is the radical and the wild swings between, hey, go hug anyone, go lick a lamppost, do whatever you want, through to, well, you're in house arrest now. And that is a wild swing that I think humans have difficulty adjusting to.
I think there's a lack of honesty as well with the situation. Like nobody, you're always going to get people which will not care, and those people won't care anyway. It doesn't matter what you do. It's the same reason we have people that break laws, or like any law. I can't help thinking that the best way to have handled lockdowns was to put the onus on people and say, look, like nobody wants to make each other sick. We need to keep moving and keep things going forwards. But we can't just pretend like nothing's going on. And at that point, if you give people personal responsibility, I think they'll take that and rise to it. But what you've ended up doing is creating this sort of like mass. I'd say majority it's a majority of social media, because that's the best way to peer into other people's lives. But the majority of those people are now looking for an answer. They're looking for decisions to be made for them. They're looking for people to say it's okay. In the same way as I thought it was hilarious yesterday when the EasyJet said they were going to start putting flights on in May. Now, the same people that 2 weeks beforehand were putting posts on social media saying things like, just stay in and wear 37 masks, it's not hard, are now the same people that are booking trips to go to the UK, to go to Primark. And there just seems to be a lack of thought from people. I don't understand I don't understand when that fixes. Like that this seems to be something this has gone on so long. We're going to be left with the wash of this now for a while.
Look, it's certainly possible, and so I think that the muscle of personal responsibility is something that needs to be exercised and to be used repeatedly if people are going to make good judgments in life. And one of the things that I guess I have a little bit, different view to some of the politicians, or many of the politicians in power, is that I just have probably a little bit more humility than many of them, because I just cannot imagine trying to set myself up in the position of making rules to say to someone, well, no, you're not allowed to sit outside. So currently, here in the Isle of Man, as of the 19th of March, it is illegal for Michael Joseph to go sit outside in the sun by himself, alone. That is prohibited. And there are a bunch of these sort of situations that where we have a political class that has such a hubris and such an arrogance to assert that they know what's best for us on so many of these different situations. And so, for example, take the hypothetical example of an elderly. In fact, actually, don't take the hypothetical example. Let me tell you of a woman who contacted me last week, and she was distraught because her father-in-law was on the way out, unrelated to COVID, was deeply sick, and her family was not able to see them properly. And so, this woman's mother-in-law was trying to contact, the media to get attention for this because she wanted to, the mother-in-law wanted to say goodbye properly and personally to the father-in-law who was dying in intensive care.
Mm.
And it's at the situation where a human being is minutes or hours away from death. It simply does not make sense to be overly concerned about protecting them from COVID, because if they're hours away from dying, it's not going to be the COVID that gets them. It's going to be this other illness or terminal disease or affliction. And so there are so many of these sort of situations that require individual common sense and that require individual consideration in a manner that you just simply can't legislate for.
Yeah, it's a complete lack of humanity, to be perfectly honest. Decisions like that are made, I can't think of any other reason why you do it. It's a complete lack of empathy, and the idea of a one size fits all for lockdowns, it also makes no sense. Obviously, it's nowhere near as severe as the situation with the lady that wants to go and see a father-in-law. My own situation, apart from collecting my son, I live on my own. So my father, who lives just up the road, who also lives on his own, but it's illegal for us to meet each other. It makes absolutely no sense in that situation.
Human relationships are complicated. They are difficult. They are different, and we do not live in the 1820s where everyone has a prescribed and certain mum and dad and two kids and whatever nuclear example. There's a lot of variety in people's relationships and a variety in people's lives, and it just requires a lot of hubris I simply don't have to make such rules.
My favourite thing I saw today, which is like strange things to see during lockdown, was two people on push bikes. When I was out, I was dropping my son back off to his mother. I saw two people on push bikes, neither of them wearing a crash helmet, both wearing face masks.
There is a hilarity to the different risk perceptions of different people, right?
But I think this is there's a derangement that's going on amongst some people, and I think this is what I worry about more. I think I worry about it more than COVID is what we're left with after this is open. I mean, you think about it. I'm sure people have got in touch with you that are doing it. I bet there's people out there that have basically not left the house since we went into first lockdown. And come May, May seems to be the date that everyone's sticking on this to think that everything's going to magically go back to normal. The events are being booked now, which I find interesting because when you've got big money events that are being booked for places that are going to hold people, I don't believe that they've got the same knowledge of what's going on that we do. I think they clearly know there is some sort of plan in place to make those things go ahead. And these people are just going to get thrust out into the world, especially on the Isle of Man, because at some point we're going to have visitors coming back and forwards from the Isle of Man, and I worry how these people are going to cope with it.
Well, people will need to reintegrate into society, and that is simply what we will need to do going forward. But on the other hand, if people want to stay isolated at home, and that is their right, that is their decision, and I would certainly not want to force someone to be social out against or outside of their own will.
No, but I think that there might be a case here where people have been forced into mental illness, and that's the other way to look at it. It's you've got people who, I mean, the other side of it is the fact that there's a certain amount of vitriol from people. Maybe I write great against that sort of thing because I've always been quite stubborn and a little bit. I don't want to say anti-establishment because it makes me sound like a prick saying things like that. But I've always been slightly argumentative with things, and I've never particularly enjoyed being told what to do. But I think there's a certain group of people out there which are reveling in being able to say, I'm doing the right thing. And I don't think those people will want this to end.
Yeah, look, different people have different expectations. And, at the end of the day, just as I would not want to prescribe people to force them to stay home or whatever the case may be, I would also not want to do the other side. So, I guess we've got to accept that people will lead their lives, and we've got to respect that.
Do you think the origins of the virus have just now been sort of swept away? We don't really have the conversations about why it happened. I know during the early days of coronavirus, when people were quite angry at how things had happened, there was quite a vocal consensus of, oh, this isn't the time to start looking at these things. But I feel that China have got away with this.
I think not. So the WHO had their aborted investigation literally just in the last couple of weeks. And in that sense, I suspect that there is an interest in that situation that is ongoing. I am hopeful that we get to the bottom of it in the fullness of time. And, maybe this will be simply a issue that will be investigated over the next 10 years, and then perhaps there will be, debates and investigations, and perhaps at some stage in the future, someone with access to the information within the Chinese administrative state will essentially serve as a whistleblower. But on the other hand, I am mindful that there is, I think, a widespread belief that it came from somewhere within China. Whether it came from a virology lab or it came from the wild, I suspect it's partly academic, in that what is very clear is that the deliberate cover-up by the Chinese authorities after that, whatever the original case was, probably led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. And the people hopefully the public will hold them accountable in the fullness of time.
I'm interested in the narrative that came out of China as well at the time. We haven't really seen. There was a lot of videos and whistleblowers, so supposed whistleblowers coming out when it was still just in China and it was just sort of sweeping across, and it gave the impression, although a serious situation, it gave the impression of something more serious. And I can't help thinking that we fell for Chinese propaganda at the beginning of this.
Well, perhaps, but we certainly, I think, today can be confident that it came from somewhere within China, and in that sense, look, it is. I don't know what the consequence of that will be. It is difficult to imagine ever extraditing and prosecuting in a court of law the perpetrators, but that is the sad consequence of the Chinese regime being far too militarily strong. And we've got to remember that in the list of crimes committed by the Chinese Communist Party, killing 1 million people globally through the coronavirus probably might get into their top 10 crimes of all time. Probably not within the top 5, given the mass murders that they've perpetrated for, almost 70 years now.
Yeah, and currently what's going on. Yeah, it's
right. Yeah, so
crazy.
So yes, the coronavirus is economically harmful to many people across the world. Is it one of the top 5 crimes of the Chinese Communist Party? Maybe. That's probably in that conversation. But like no one was ever held accountable in China for any of their other mass murders or the genocides that they've perpetrated, the Great Leap Forward, or the Mao's Cultural or Industrial Revolution, or even the genocide that is happening today in the Uyghurs.
The footage that came out of that, with the people waiting to get on the trains and stuff like that, it was all far too reminiscent of times past, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I did not want to watch the actual videos because it does bring back memories of videos that I've seen. Well, I don't know, videos. It brings back memories of images that I've seen that touch a little bit closer to the Josem family.
Mm-hmm.
My cousin leads is the curator of the Holocaust Museum in Melbourne, in Australia, and the graphic nature of some of that material will stick with me, and it is a powerful and devastating memory that I have to think how fortunate my grandparents were to escape that, but also how tragic it was that 11 of my grandfather's brothers and sisters did not.
Mm.
And that is tough. It is sad. And it sort of makes me feel in a way analogous to the current lockdown. The problem with the current lockdown is that especially in the early stages, I felt deeply helpless and I felt frustrated that I was unable to do something. And so perhaps that might be a feeling that other people are feeling as well, in that it's, what can we do to fight the coronavirus? Well, nothing. You got to stay home. You got to sit down. You've got to watch your Amazon Prime or your Netflix, or you've got to work from home, or you've got to do whatever. And those things are just not very satisfying, in that we do not have the ability to sign up for the draft, not for the draft, but to sign up to enlist, the crises of 106 and 75 years ago, where our civilization was faced a traditional war. Whereas in this war, what do? Well, you got to sit home. You got to stay there.
I don't think we'd have to worry about sign-ups. I think we live in a world where we can't even work out how we're going to educate our children. So I'm not sure if there was a sign-up procedure, there'd be too many people willing to throw themselves in the way of danger.
Well, look, different people have different circumstances, and I suspect that if there was a situation like that, I think a chunk of people would want to do something. I tried to sign up to the British Army Reserves a few years ago, and they rejected me due to a footballing injury that I suffered to my back almost 10 years ago now. And for me, one of the things that is important in me in my life is to do stuff to make the world a better place. And I suspect that is something that a lot of people want to do. I believe that there is a desire from people to contribute to something, whether it be on the small scale of their family or their community or their faith or their vocation, but to have purpose in life. This, I think, is probably why a modern-day author such as Jordan Peterson, who sells so many books, is because he offers a path to purpose. He offers a framework to live by. And these ideas of having purpose in life, I think, are attractive to a lot of people. And I think that's also correlated with the desperation that people feel and have felt over the last year or so, which causes various suicide issues. Now, I don't think that purpose is the only factor, but I suspect that in the group of people who do commit suicide, I suspect that there is a correlation, maybe not causation, but a correlation with feeling a lack of purpose. And that is difficult for me to comprehend how someone who has a deep purpose in life would self-harm. And so I think there is a real thirst for our generation to have purpose. And so that's why when I do speak to people in different walks of life, I encourage them to find that purpose, to have something to strive for, whether it be their family, as I said before, or their faith, or their vocation, or their community, or their street, or their sporting club, or their Tiddlywink society, or the bottle collecting club, or whatever it is, and to find that purpose and to work towards it.
Do you think that's a problem with modern lifestyle? Is we are, I don't want to say everybody, because I mean there's lots of people out there which have either fulfilling jobs or fulfilling hobbies that they can do to supplement maybe a boring job. But apart from that, there's also a lot of people which either don't have the time or the resources to do something that they're interested in. I think the most important thing for me, I mean, even as someone that's only after being a little bit sick a couple of years ago, and the lockdown coming and seeing how much physical health was a factor for people that got in trouble. That's something I've been trying to do now over the last sort of year and a half now, is to try and get myself into a little bit better shape. But if you've got people which are now trapped in the houses, maybe didn't have didn't have something they could do in the house to keep their minds occupied, such as doing podcasts and stuff like that, and then the lack of physical activity. It just feels like a recipe for depression.
Yeah, correct, absolutely. And I think that lack of that feeling of trappedness, I don't know how to properly pronounce that word. That feeling of being trapped is, I think, a big part of this lack of purpose. And so that's why I suspect there's been a surge in things such as video game playing over the last year, whereby people can have essentially a fake purpose created. It's I don't know how much time you've spent playing computer games and so on.
A little,
but
I dabble.
A little, you dabble, right? And so one of the things that many of them have developed over the last couple of few years is this idea of leveling up, this to essentially gamify these various achievements, and that various writers, much smarter than I have made the argument that this is essentially creating a fake sense of purpose. It is creating a feeling of progression. It is creating a feeling of development when there's no real development there. And that those ideas of fake progression can be very alluring. And so in America, there is increasing data that suggests that there are a chunk of people who are falling out of normal, happy, healthy life progression to essentially focus almost substantially on playing computer games. And the result being is that these people, who many of them are men, are not going out and finding wives to marry. They're not going out to find fulfillment in having children. They're not going out finding fulfillment in developing careers. They're not finding fulfillment in a church attendance or another faith, path. And instead, being trapped by this, it's almost like an addiction of playing computer games, and therefore signing out of society. And those people are going to be in for a rude awakening in 5 or 10 or 20 years, because they will lose, great big chunks of life when they could be doing something much more, valuable or constructive.
Yeah, I
now,
think...
That said, also, by the way, computer games can be a fun, entertainment. And so, what we're talking about here is that over the whole population of people, there are some people, and it's difficult perhaps to quantify, who are signing out of life and getting into these, addictive ruts, as it were.
Yeah. Do you think the problem with that as well is the fact that, especially for young people that fall into that, I think it's only, maybe I might think I'm wrong again in another 10 years' time, But at 38 now, it suddenly dawns on you just how finite life is. You know, when you're 20 to 25 sort of thing, even at that age where you're a man, but it still feels like, oh, there's loads of time to do everything, and then all of a sudden that time disappears, and then it's harder because you have other responsibilities other than that. You know, the amount of free space you had when you were younger. So if you go and invest like huge chunks of your life, like you say, in something which is essentially not real, I can't imagine what the feeling would be when you hit 38 and you look back and you go, wow, I've got nothing to show for the first half of my life apart from a huge gamer score on Xbox.
Well, you have perfectly described there, Lee, the concept of the midlife crisis.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly what the midlife crisis is. That is exactly the time it hits. As a 39-year-old man, I've questioned my choices in life many times, and I think the solution is to have a purpose, because these things will not be satisfied by the traditional or typical or stereotypical midlife crises thing of buying a car or finding a new wife or any of that thing like that, but rather to find life fulfillment of life purpose in a manner that is deeper beyond any mere physical thing. And I think that step that has been important to me has been trying to move from a world of consumption into a mindset of production.
Mm-hmm.
And so by that I mean not just focusing on the things that you consume, whether it be experiences or alcohol or movies or computer games or whatever, but to focus and turn towards production and service. And so that's why, like at the start of this conversation when we spoke about my, what I've been up to the last few months, it's been a real change for me over the last few years, is to focus and rededicate my life to one of service, because I find that much more happy and fulfilling, and ultimately, I hope it will lead me to have a happier life in the long term.
Yeah. Again, I think it is an age thing, where it becomes more and more apparent that all you can really do is affect your current surroundings, isn't it? It's if you can affect other people positively, then your surroundings will be more positive. And in a time where I think positivity is pretty hard to come across.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree. All you can do is you can control your own life. You can only control your own surroundings, and so that's why, if you have listeners, find a community group of whatever it is, and for me, I don't want to give life advice to your listeners when I think about it, Lee, because let's be honest, it's not as if I'm particularly expert at living life.
Hey, look, if they're listeners to me on a regular basis, they clearly need some tips from someone, and so.
Well, I don't know about that. Like the demographics of people who listen to podcasts is probably a smart group of people, especially those who can track down and filter out some of the different ideas in the world. But to focus, I guess, on the point there is that to frame it in the context of what has been good for me. And what has been good for me, because I've not been able to, maintain a successful, happy, long-term wife relationship. I've never been married, and I live alone. And so one of the things that I have found deeply fulfilling, deeply satisfying has been to get involved in various local community groups. And people say to me, "Oh, Michael, aren't you good for volunteering for the food bank or whatever?" And I don't really think I am, because it's ultimately a selfish act. In that the selfish act there has been to go out and serve. It's made me better. It's made me happier. It's made me more satisfied. And the fact that when I go drop off food at the food bank, that makes people's lives better. That's a bonus. That's great. But Michael Josem has derived a great deal of happiness and internal satisfaction from doing so. So it is certainly not, by any stretch of the imagination, some sort of selfless act.
I did, just to jump slightly, because I wanted to bring this up before, and it just popped into my mind before. How do you feel about this? Like, because we've spoke about police overreach quite a lot when we spoke to each other on the podcasts. How do you feel about what's going on currently in the UK with like the new powers being given and stuff like that?
So I'm not familiar with the details of specific laws that have been implemented even recently in the UK, and so I'm a bit reluctant to comment on individual laws. But this morning I woke up and I read a story of a elderly woman, and forgive me as I speak slowly and I try and find the actual story here. Here we are. So this is reported on ITV this morning about a pensioner given a COVID breach warning over a socially distanced cup of tea. The 82-year-old was visited by police after she had been reported for drinking tea outside with neighbours from her sheltered housing complex.
Wow.
And
regardless of, but before we even get to the police giving a notice to that lady, you have to be a real piece of shit to grass in neighbours having a cup of tea together.
It is a world that is just foreign to me, and so I cannot imagine this. And so a force spoke to this. This is what a representative of the police. So let's give both sides of the story here, because let's be fair.
Yeah,
is a force spokesperson said an officer has spoken to the complainant, and an explanation was provided in response to concerns raised. COVID response officers attended later that day at around 9:45 p.m, where some residents were spoken to and given words of advice around current restrictions. Officers are deployed to incidents based on an assessment of the threat, risk and harm of the incident, and in this case, officers who are part of the COVID response team and are deployed across the county attended later that evening. And it is just a world of like I can't relate to calling the police on an 82-year-old woman who has a cup of tea outside of her neighbours.
No,
like, that is just a different. That is I think so. It's difficult for me to comment. Like I just can't think. Well, geez, really?
Well, this is the what I was talking about before, isn't it? The people. Mind you, realistically, what people are doing is the negative side of what you're doing. They're finding purpose in being the vitriolic, like lockdown, like abider. It's I'm following the rules, so you should. I'm miserable, so you should be miserable as well.
Well, yeah, I do not think that is a path to happiness.
No, I don't. It's horrible.
That is correct, and so in that sense, it is just a world that is foreign to me. I'm grateful that it is foreign to me, and so I will not be ringing the police on any 82-year-old women who have socially distanced cups of tea in her communal garden. That is just, But one of the difficulties here with this virus, and I want to be fair here, is that there is an externality, right? And so if you I don't know, take the example of the kids riding a bike earlier. They do not wear their helmet and they hit their head on the ground and they crack and they kill themselves. Well, ultimately it's a kid who dies.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to be, it doesn't, the failure to wear a helmet does not actually really harm other people. And so the thing that does give me some degree of sympathy for whoever called the police or reported is that there is an externality here in that while an individual might not get sick, they might cause someone else to get sick. And so it is difficult in that sense to, there is an angle perhaps where we can give consideration to those people.
I think from what I gather, I might be completely wrong about this. I'm sure someone will tell me if I am. It's the wording that concerned me when it came to protests, and it was like causing like a public irritant or something like that, and it seemed to be so open ended that you thought I don't know when these powers couldn't be used on people.
Yeah. So again, look, I'm not familiar with the details of that legislation, so I'm probably not a good person to comment on that, and I prefer not to comment on things that
Yeah, of course.
I'm not familiar or across.
Just I think it's. I'm always worried about these things. What we're left with afterwards, and how many of these like coronavirus measures that come into force once, be it when the virus eventually like mutates and probably becomes less severe, coupled with vaccination and stuff like that. When we're finally sort of rid of it, is I wonder how many of these things are just going to lurk about a little bit. I also think the knowledge that the government have, that they can just turn around and tell people that they can't go to work and they can't provide for their families, and they're going to do it. I think that's awful intel to give to them.
Yeah, look, it's look, I hear where you're coming from. I think that in the UK and in the here in the Isle of Man, that sort of attitude or long term. Well, I don't know what the right word is, but that long term capturing of power is unlikely, and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to remove these powers as soon as the COVID crisis ends.
I hope so, but I don't have a lot of faith in that. I don't. I struggle to think of when obviously there's nothing like this has happened in my lifetime, so that's why I struggle to think about it. But another example where government has taken such control and then relinquished it. I'm not. I don't know. It just doesn't work in my head. I just don't see it. I don't see it as waking up one day and all of a sudden everyone go, yeah, do you know what? Everything's fine. Even your people like the Matt Hancock, for instance, someone that's clearly enjoying his time in the spotlight. I wonder if these people will want this to carry on longer. Will want to be the center of attention, because it's what most people want. Most people want some sort of acknowledgement for what they're doing or what they're trying to do. I think there's a lot of people that won't want this to end, that have the power to keep it going.
Yeah, I don't see the evidence of that. It's
isn't it human nature though?
Well, not necessarily. So I think that there is a pretty healthy culture in our Western liberal democracies of, Australia, UK, US, and so on, to be relatively liberal in such things, and so I guess that when or if such situations arise, then we will have to debate it. But in the meantime, if you or your listeners are interested in these issues, there's a wonderful organisation in the UK called Big Brother Watch, and it is doing some good research on these issues, drawing good attention to these issues. Yeah, so they're good. They're good people, and I think that there will be a number of lobby groups and that will advocate for a return to freedom and to remove these powers.
Yeah, it reminds me of a tweet you put out the other day of that terrible situation in Nobles Park and the Isle of Man where children met up, and are they going to be taken to court?
Well, the phrase was odd here. So that's a good question there, in that the phrase in the media reporting was judicial action. And exactly what judicial action is could be a little bit vague. That might just simply be some sort of warning, or it might be sort of a hearing, it might be some sort of reprimand from the police. And so in that sense, it is unclear exactly what the outcome will be there. But what I think was interesting there is the contrast that we have these children playing, and for the benefit of anyone listening who might not be familiar with this case, short version is that some children were playing in the park and the police found them and identified them apparently. And so there is talk that they will receive judicial action, whatever that is. Meanwhile, you and I, Lee, and the rest of the people here on the Isle of Man are in the midst of a, so far, 2-and-a-bit-week lockdown, probably going to go for at least another 3 weeks at the minimum, because of a case of the coronavirus that appears to have been seeded and come out of the Isle of Man steam packet. And in that case, it appears to have happened because substantially it was connected to the steam packet staff, apparently followed the rules that they were directed to do so. And there was some sort of confusion or miscommunication somewhere within the government about exactly what the rules should be for the steam packet staff to follow. And so it seems that whoever that person is in the government who stuffed up will not be held accountable. That person will not face any judicial action. And in fact, we heard this week in Tynwald, which is the Parliament of the Isle of Man, that the determination that these people would not be prosecuted was not made on the official advice of the police. It was not made on the official advice of the Attorney General. It was not made on the official advice of the prosecutors, but rather it was made because the Chief Minister and the Chief Secretary, who is simply a senior bureaucrat, made that decision. Neither of them have any legal qualifications. Neither of them have any legal capacity to make a determination about what is or what is not prosecutable. And beyond their lack of qualification, their role as the leaders of the executive should entirely disqualify themselves from making decisions about whether or not to prosecute individuals. The prosecution process here in our Westminster-derived, British-derived Manx system are supposed to be made not by politicians and not by bureaucrats, but by professional and relatively independent prosecutors.
Yeah. It's just a crazy situation to me. Like, I think, did you post something like, imagine showing somebody this headline like a year and a half ago?
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same way that the government thought was considering to decriminalise people who live alone from hugging another human being. Mm-hmm. It is just something it would be very difficult to describe to a human who lived in 2019.
Yeah,
but then again, I guess our framework has moved. I read an opinion article. It was an editorial in the New York Times in 2011, and it was talking about the horrors of Abu Ghraib, which, if you're not familiar with, that was a situation where a number of Iraqi prisoners were held and abused and tortured and demeaned in a whole series of unreservedly horrific and wrong ways. Mm-hmm. And there were photos made of these prisoners being sexually abused and humiliated and in a terrible way. And this New York Times editorial from 2011 wrote that even at the height of the Abu Ghraib torture prison, and this is not an exact quote, but words to the effect of, even in that situation, special permission was still needed from the general to hold someone in solitary confinement for more than 30 days. Mm. Because we know that holding people in solitary confinement is deeply harmful. And of course, the situations of these lockdowns that we are going in and out of are not to the extent of the solitary confinement. They're not to the extent of being in a prison. But it has shown that our framework has changed. And that's something that we thought was so different. It's just a whole view from a whole different time. Yeah,
I mean, my thing with people living on their own as well. I'm seeing it happen to my own mother actually. Is what social media is doing to people right now. I mean, if it wasn't for the podcast, I think I've definitely maybe halfway through last year, I hit the point where I wouldn't use social media anymore if if it wasn't for the fact that it's basically the only way to pimp podcasts to people. But yeah, people end up locked in their own houses, and what I find more worrying than anything else is it's that increasingly blurry line where people think that social media is the real world, where it's not the real world. It's like some sort of warped funhouse mirror of the real world. And if you keep people like locked up for a massive amount of time, and that's their only window outside, I think that's why you're getting people which have basically just been terrorized for a year.
Well, I don't know. I think that social media is a tool, and in that sense, it's a tool that can be used for good, and it can be used for bad. And so, there are good parts to social media, and there are bad parts.
I think the bad outweigh the good quite substantially. Apart from even down to the fact what you put is like communication being a good thing for it, but I'm not even convinced that us as animals are geared up for instant communication with people, and not just instant communication, but instant communication with so many people. Yeah,
it's a different world, and it's a tool, and I don't know. I guess we will see what happens over time, but human brains do seem to have some sort of innate limit with the number of people that we can maintain happy and healthy relationships to. There's a number, I forget the scientist who first talked about it or discovered it, but he made the point or she made the point, I don't know, that it seems to be something that's correlated with the size of ancient tribes, the size of Roman legions, and a whole bunch of military units through history, but also just simply organizational units, whereby human brains seem to have the capacity to be able to maintain relationships with about 100, maybe 150 people at the most. And so that's why we have centurions, the famous heads of the Roman legions, because they would be in charge of 100 people, centurions, and that's why an army, a military company, typically about depending on the exact division, but in the vicinity of about 100 people as well, and it's this new world of social media is opening us up to huge multiples of that in a manner that I'm sure that our brains simply do not have the capacity to manage in an effective way in equivalent relationships to what we might have done on the African savannah or the some sort of Asian plain or anywhere else in the world in the past.
Do you think I think there's a distinct lack of empathy, not in people sort of on a one-to-one basis. I think it's still there, but on the broader sense, like herd empathy, if you want. Do you think that's because people have started seeing people just more as numbers? It's more as like how many followers you have or how many friends on Facebook you have. There's people that live on, I'll say people on the Isle of Man, which we've only got like 80,000 people. And I know people with like 5,000 or 6,000 friends on their Facebook, and you think, you haven't got 5,000 friends. You're probably lucky if you got 5. And it's that gamified thing as well with some people where it's just more.
I probably should look to see how many people I currently have friends on Facebook, because I might well be in that category. And so again, I guess I return to the point that different people use social media in different ways. Mm-hmm. And so, apparently I have, on the Facebook, I've just under 3,000 friends. A chunk of them are from uni, a chunk of them from, work after uni, a chunk of them over the 10 years I've met here on the Isle of Man. Mm-hmm. And I remember actually last year I went through a significant cull and removed about 1,000 or something of people who I no longer had any contact with. And, I do not think that numbers like that are particularly meaningful, because they're not, it's not a, it's like, I could have these people on an email list, for example. If I sent out a mass email once a day of various content, that might be a different situation. But I guess it's just a tool, and you got to, I think, maintain some appropriate level of self-awareness and self-criticism to recognise that those online relationships are different. Because there are also some good things. I only got to know you, Lee, through the benefit of this online social media, right? And so I think my life is at least a little bit better because I know you, Lee.
Yeah.
And so that means that there is some goodness as well as some difficulty.
Yeah, I hope so. It just feels that lots of the cultural problems we seem to be having, the tribal nature of things, it just seems to get worse and worse with every single I don't know, call it landmark event. Landmark's probably the wrong word for it, but everything that happens, it seems to embolden teams more and more now. I can't help but think that's a gamified, the active element of society. It's because these people get to fight with each other on social media all the time.
Yeah, to a certain extent, I'm sure that's true, and I think there is a certain toxicity in online media debates in that to share stuff publicly on various political issues. It's you can only do it if you're willing to endure a whole lot of abuse. like just in the last couple of hours, some people found some GIF images of me or whatever in front of an Isle of Man flag, and so hence there are people arguing over whether or not I should have a Manx flag in my room, and it is tiresome. It is difficult, and so I think that we will see a lot of people self-censor, which is sad in a way, because you've got to always consider whether or not you're willing to, endure an argument if you do post something or you do share something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, there's been a few times now where you look at something, you go, I don't have the energy to engage in that.
Correct.
But maybe that's what more people need to do. Maybe if you don't have the energy to engage in it, you clearly don't care about it enough to actually want to do it. So maybe that's the way we should look at social media now. If it's something you've got the energy to do it, and not just fucking add to the cacophony of noise that's out there. Speaking, you mentioned Jordan Peterson before. I don't know if you listen to the Trigonometry podcast.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
It's dead good. It's one of my favorite podcasts, and he was a guest on it the other day, and he brought up the tribalism and people arguing with each other, and it makes total sense. But it's one of those situations where it's only when somebody like him puts it across to you in a different way that you suddenly realise it. He said the importance of being correct is lost because all people are interested in is winning an argument, where if you could win an argument, and you could win an argument because you've got maybe better verbal skills than the other person or slightly more knowledge about something that's wrong, and you can win the argument that way. But in personal relationships, it doesn't work. It's where people are arguing with each other, and people either give up or get shouted down. And in most cases, if you're getting shouted down on something, it doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. You're just you've come up against something that's louder.
That's true if you see this as a venue to argue and to defeat your opponent. Whereas I don't see it like that. I think there is a lot of value in online discussion. Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people do, and I'm sure that's why a lot of them are very bad at social media, and I think that's a very short-sighted view of theirs. And instead, I think it is worthwhile to think about persuading the audience, in that you're not speaking to or with whoever's, whatever random clown is wading into your Twitter mentions to abuse you and so on today, but rather you're speaking to the audience, because there are a lot of people who do read and do watch, and it is interesting to see if in my own, political endeavours, to talk about a particular idea and to use a particular phrase, and then to see it be picked up and used by someone who was not even in that original conversation. And I think that there is a value in using, things such as Twitter, where we talk about current affairs and current issues, whether it be the football or whether it be the music or whether it be the politics or whether it be the, whatever. I think there's value because you've got to remember you're speaking to the audience, not to whoever you're necessarily, replying to on this particular occasion.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is part of my midlife crisis. Maybe part of my midlife crisis is just is becoming increasingly more nihilist by the day.
Well, perhaps, but you've got the good fortune of having a wonderful child who is, and I think that you're not so quite nihilist, but rather, from what little I know of Lee, he seems to be making the world a better place. And interested in leaving a legacy for his offspring.
Yeah, I mean, it's a friend of mine said the other day that all we are is what we leave behind, so we might as well try and leave some sort of footprint at the end of it.
Yeah.
So, on that cheery note, mate, I think we'll wrap the podcast up today.
You mean we don't even get to talk about all the crank conspiracy theorists you've had on in recent weeks?
If you want to, yeah. You've been the most grounded podcast I've had for ages. Don't worry. I've got like a sort of round table thing about UFOs the week after.
Oh God! Well, I tell you what, I listened to the first chunk of your podcast with what's his name, Courtney
Adam Lawrence.
Courtney Adam,
yeah, interesting character, isn't he?
He's full on. I tell you what, I think the medical miracle there is that he somehow is able to speak for 20 minutes non-stop without taking a breath, and I think that is amazing. But one of the things that I think is difficult with someone like that is that because he speaks so quickly and confidently, what he is ultimately saying is he does not believe in germ theory.
Yeah,
he believes that illness is some sort of holistic thing you get because your body isn't in balance, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a widespread view, or it was a widespread view in Europe up until about the 1800s.
Yeah,
it was a widespread view in India up until about 1,000 years ago. And I think it is difficult to have a meaningful conversation with someone like that because he simply discounts the last 200 years of medical progress, and similar to the flat Earth guy. And I couldn't help but laugh when we started off with a description of a slinky of how it stops every step, which is just not true. I don't know if you've ever looked at and watched a slinky, but the slinky keeps moving, and so in that sense, I just thought to myself, these people mean well, but they have such fundamental flaws in their rationale that it makes it difficult for a normal person to engage with and debate because they're just throwing out such a huge volume of content so quickly. It takes a bit of time to understand what these people are actually thinking and what they're actually saying and what their key argument is.
I think the interesting thing with Courtney was it was such a strange podcast to do because if you take what he was saying about like big pharma and pharmaceutical companies making patients essentially and people being put on long-term medication with no real intention of looking at it and getting them off it, I agree with that. I agree with the readiness we are to give people antidepressant medication as well without looking at the side effects of the side effects of which in many cases is depression, which is odd. But then it took I was completely blindsided when he just dropped in that the heart isn't a pump. If you got that far.
No, I did not.
Yeah, no, I've since gone just for my own curiosity. The guy who wrote this book on I can't remember the guy's name now, but the book's called "The Heart Is Not a Pump," and I watched a seminar with him explaining why it's not. The heart itself couldn't pump blood around like the length of like veins and arteries that we have, because it isn't strong enough. And it's complete nonsense. You listen to it and you like think, I don't get this. And it's one of those situations where that guy's clearly looked into a lot of things, and he's obviously not stupid. You know, he's not a stupid man.
Absolutely, and I agree, and I have a number of mutual friends with Courtney, and they all say he used to be sharp and really, switched on and connected, but something flipped whereby he stopped believing in germ theory, which is, such a weird thing to take issue with.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is dead simple. I think I had a conversation with somebody else about this the other day. I say if because they didn't believe in viruses either, and I said, well, just have a child and send them to play school, and what will happen is you will be sick for a year, and everything they come home with you will have. And I don't understand. I don't get that. And I'm a pretty open-minded guy when it comes to stuff. Probably too open-minded, but I've always kind of looked at most of these things. There's a few conspiracy theories that I will, if someone stuck a gun to my head, I'd probably believe in. But I've always kind of looked at this as entertainment, and it maybe more so like lately. I've realised just how much conspiracy theory stifles genuine concerns. You know, you can't for instance, if like talk about vaccines, I'm quite concerned for the amount of time that the COVID vaccines been in production for. I'm concerned about long-term side effects for it. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. But now, because that then you've got to start that conversation by going, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but, and all of a sudden you're starting a conversation by going, I'm not racist, but, and I've realised just how much whereas I used to find like all the really out there conspiracy theories, like I could just wax a couple of hours sat in front of YouTube, like 5 YouTube videos later. It's like, oh wow, the world was flat for 5 hours there. Oh well, I must move on. I've realised just how much some of it stifles like genuine conversation.
I'm sure that's true, and I think there's a dumbing down of our society that tries to fit everything into a yes/no, into some sort of 2-horse race argument here, and especially like take the situation of vaccines, and the current debacle across the European Union with just their series of trying to shoot themselves in the foot in incredibly dumb ways. In that the decision-making situation that is faced by a health minister of a given country about whether or not to allow AstraZeneca is a very different decision between that faced by an individual of whether or not to take it. Mm-hmm. In that if I can understand that if an individual doesn't want to take it, it's their decision, it's their body. They should certainly not be forced to take it against their will. Right? And so I feel very strongly that an individual can make that decision for them and their family as appropriate.
How do you feel about?
But when the health minister says no, we're going to stop delivering AstraZeneca, then I say that person is an A-grade certifiable moron. They are an idiot. They are going to effectively kill people, and they should, if not be sacked, then they should probably be held criminally liable for the deaths that they will cause. And that is because the decision making at different levels of the issue is very different. In that someone who says we're going to stop rolling out this vaccine, which has to weigh that off against the number of people who would otherwise die from the disease. And it's people do not have a choice as a health minister, do I do the vaccine or do I do nothing? That is not the choice they face. they're faced with, do I do the vaccine or do I do with 15 extra people dying in Germany today?
I mean,
And
do you think that's the problem though with lockdown in general, and it's and the responsibility that governments took on itself? It goes back to what we said before about people being stripped of like the personal responsibility to do these things. So in that respect, I can understand if you've already told a country's worth of people that they can't go to work. I can understand why all of a sudden you feel like you would have the authority to stop them to stop them having a vaccine if you thought that there might be something wrong with it. You know, it goes back into the overreach of power, doesn't it?
Yeah, and look, you know, there is a risk there. I am hopeful that risk will be reduced over time, and you know, I guess we will see. But you know, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, I guess.
How do you feel, quickly, because we're back on this, about the idea of the vaccine passports?
Well, I just don't understand how it would work. In that, currently, if you go and get your vaccine, you know, here in the Isle of Man and the UK, you get a little piece of paper, and you know, it gets scribbled on by someone. You know, how are you going to possibly computerize that?
Mm-hmm.
Will someone who gets the vaccine, the Chinese vaccine, or the Russian vaccine, or the the French vaccine, or the whatever vaccine, how are they all going to be certified? I just can't comprehend how it would ever work. But you know, what might be plausible is a airline might say, hey, look, you're only allowed to fly on my airline if you have some sort of documentation if you self-certify that you've received the vaccine. And so in that sense, I am skeptical about how some sort of government-run vaccine passport could ever work. But on the other hand, if an airline says, hey, we don't want to carry anyone who's not been vaccinated, then how can I override their right of association? For Michael Joseph's home here, which I own my own home. If I want to put a sign up at the door and says you're only allowed in my home if you've had a vaccine, well, obviously I'm allowed to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's fair.
How can you deny that to the the guy who drives a taxi? If you allow the guy who drives a taxi, well then why not allow that guy who drives a plane?
I'd be interested to know how many people abstain. When there's more supply, and essentially when we've got more supply of the vaccine than there is demand. I'll be interested to know how many people decide not to, because I think it's going to be a reasonably high number, like a reasonably high number of people that don't really want to take this. And at that point, you think, well, if you let's say we have vaccine passports that come in, so all of a sudden you have, say, Ticketmaster decide that you can't buy from Ticketmaster if you haven't been vaccinated, and airlines jump on the same thing. Do you risk creating the haves and have not like society? In the same way like where what you've got in Brave New World, and that to me is a bit worrying.
Well, people, I think, have to live with the consequences of their decisions, and people have a right to freedom of association. In that world, I can't comprehend how we could, force someone to allow a customer in against the business's will. I don't know if that's how any of that works. But one of the things I am looking forward to doing is to look forward to a debate on exactly this issue by various different stakeholders. One of them is Silky Carlo, who is the leader of Big Brother Watch, and she's taking part in a debate on unheard.com, unherd.com, and they've got a video debate from different points of view, and I think it'll be really interesting to watch that in an intelligent and sophisticated manner, in a place much better than I suspect that than what we would get in your traditional legacy media outlets.
The old Big Brother watch. A few years ago, that was looked at as a conspiracy theory Twitter profile. Really, now there was you shared something from them. you got a few fingers pointed at you. I'm wondering whether now if you're going down this road in a couple of weeks, will you be coming back on the podcast talking about the holes in virology and what the shape of the Earth is?
Unheard.com is a pretty
not
mainstream-
Unheard. The Big Brother Watch.
Okay, yeah, so they're a not-for-profit organisation based in the UK. Silky's a good woman. I don't know her personally, but one of my very best friends does, and I trust that. But if you disagree with her, then so be it.
I don't.
Her arguments are there, so.
I think we're slowly walking into a totalitarian police state, Michael. So I think they're bang on to be concerned.
Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens. But in the immediate case, that's a debate on this issue that I think will be much more and better informed than I would possibly be on the issue, and something that I'll be looking forward to watch. And perhaps that might be a good thing for your viewers to watch as well.
Yeah, when is it?
It's online right now. It's just released, I want to say, today.
Oh, right, okay, cool.
So,
I might watch that tonight instead of watching the Justice League.
It sounds a delight. A friend of mine, she was saying that she's going to rewatch all the Marvel movies in chronological order, and I've seen none of them, so I feel like I might need to get into that.
I did that on the first lockdown. The first lockdown last year, I watched all the Marvel movies one after another.
The whole world that I've thoroughly lacked. If you had to choose one or two, what are the highlights?
I think Iron Man's cool. I think it's a real shame that the superhero movies, because I think if it was any other genre, Robert Downey Jr. would be covered in awards for what he did for the Marvel universe. Because essentially, if you take Robert Downey Jr. out of MCU, the whole thing crumbles and falls apart on itself. I think he's basically carried a whole franchise on his shoulders.
Is that the same as Guardians of the Galaxy?
Yep. They're the best ones, to be honest. Two Guardians of the Galaxy films are the two best Marvel films in my eyes. That and Doctor Strange.
One of my very favourite movie reviewer is a man, and his name is legitimately called Sonny Bunch, and he
did he get into this after porn?
No, that's his real name. His name is Sonny, and his surname is Bunch, Bunch, and he is easily my favourite movie reviewer. And he chose Guardians of the Galaxy as his favourite, one of his favourite movies of a year in the 20 teens. And I've got the disc, and so maybe that might be the place to start for me.
If you're going to watch it, go and stump up for Disney Plus and start from the beginning. Watch them all. You've still got time. We've got another 3 weeks. You've got loads of time.
Yeah, but as we discussed at the beginning of this podcast, I've now got my new not-for-profit endeavour. I've got my co-op charity thing. I've got my Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Plus, I'm doing some other bits and pieces with the local food bank and serving to help out with as an essential worker with stacking supermarket shelves as well. Mm-hmm. So the combination of all of that means that I don't have much in the way of additional time.
Well, thanks for coming on again today, mate. I've thoroughly enjoyed today.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. Good to chat to you as always, Lee.
No, definitely, and I hope we do this again soon, and not when I think I've got coronavirus.
That's fair. That'll be fun.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
You are listening to Must Audio.
Looking for a new podcast to listen to? Here's what we love, courtesy of Acast Recommends.
Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and along with Tracy Cox, who is an international sex expert and author of 17 books, I co-host the podcast Sex Talk with Zibby and Tracy, and it's SEXTOK. And the reason we have it as Sex Talk is because we happen to be viral TikTok stars at the moment, with some of our videos getting over 1.1 million views. So listen to us. I am totally shy and squeamish. She is super open, British, and hilarious. Listen to us each week as Tracy answers 3 anonymously sourced questions about all the things you talk to your girlfriends about. Listen on Acast or wherever you get your podcasts. Sex Talk with Zibby and Tracy.
Acast recommends.